Hello, everyone. I'm Deyasini Roy, and I welcome you all to the Stories of the Indian Diaspora series with reference to TMYS Review's June 2021 project that is inviting stories on the Indian diaspora. This is basically to investigate the ambition based movement under our annual theme of migration, resettlement, and displacement. We are honored to present Dr. Nyla Ali Khan. She currently teaches at the Rose State College and the Oklahoma City Community College. She was a former visiting professor at the University of Oklahoma and former associate professor at the University of Nebraska-Kearney. She is the author of 4 books, including The Fiction of Nationality in an Era of Transnationalism and Islam, Women and Violence in Kashmir between India and Pakistan, and several articles that focus heavily on the political issues and strife of her homeland, Jammu and Kashmir, India. In May 2015, she was the first Kashmiri woman to be nominated and accepted as a member of the Advisory Council for the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women. In March 2019, she was appointed Commissioner of the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women by Senator pro tempore of the Oklahoma Senate. We welcome you, ma'am, and a very good morning to you.
Good morning,
Also,
Rosie. Thank you so much.
we have Dr. Sourav Banerjee joining us today in the session. Dr. Sourav Banerjee is an associate professor at Mahitosh Nandi Mahavidyalaya, Hooghly, West Bengal, a government-aided college affiliated to the University of Calcutta. With 17 years in teaching, his areas of interest are Shakespearean dramas, gender and culture studies, romantic poetry, post-colonial literature, and post-humanism. He has conducted one-to-one online interviews of academic stalwarts like Francesca Ferrando, Bill Ashcroft, Paul Sherrod, Evangelia Vasilako, and Samanita Das. He is also presently an Education Ambassador India of International Organization of Educators and Researchers Corporation, Philippines. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Deyasini.
Yeah. So I would like to begin today's session by asking ma'am about her first book called The Fiction of Nationality in an Era of uh, Transnationalism, where uh, you have examined the writings of Naipaul, Rushdie, Amitav Ghosh, and Anita Desai, and also provide an objective view of how transnationalism can distort impressions of reality. If you could tell us a bit more about your first book.
Thank you for that question, Deshini. The fiction of nationality in an era of transnationalism was my PhD dissertation, which was
Okay.
published as a book by Routledge in 2005. So you are absolutely correct. In that book, I examined the works of 4 South Asian writers, Salman Rushdie, V.S. Naipaul, Amitav Ghosh, and Anita Desai. And I look at the intertwined topics and issues of the resurgence of religious and cultural fundamentalisms in South Asia, nationalism, and transnationalism. I also look at how, although we live in the era of globalization and transnationalism um, have not led to an, a questioning, an intelligent interrogating of fundamentalisms and monoculturalisms. On the contrary, transnationalism can lead to the unhealthy and uncritical romanticization of cultures of origin. And because transnational subjects are geographically and physically removed from their countries of origin, they are safe from the economic depredations and political oppressions that exist in their countries of origin. So, from a distance, it all seems very romantic, it all seems glorious, and every aspect of the culture of origin, the country of origin, is glorified. There is no critical distance that is required to understand, interrogate, and challenge the resurgence of monocultural identities, of political identities that do not accommodate diversity, that do not accommodate multiplicity of points of view. And in the fiction of nationality, in an era of transnationalism, I interrogate these works of fiction through a historical lens, and I also look at history more closely and examine history through these works of fiction. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, so, ma'am, we would also like to know how your diasporic experiences have shaped your writing that provide insights into the shaping of a collective cultural consciousness to look at the world through an empathetically sensitive lens of a newer feminine sensibility that speaks to the specificities of cultural geography, to the necessities of women subjected to cultural conditioning, and most importantly, that enables women to cross the borders of their self and of the attributive structural bridge of the feminine.
That's an excellent question.
Thank
So,
you.
living and working in the diaspora has been a liberating experience for me. You see, first of all, I would like to tell you a little about my upbringing in the Kashmir Valley. So, I was raised in the Kashmir Valley in an environment that was pluralistic,
Mhm,
that recognized diversity of cultural, religious, and linguistic identities, that recognized the emancipation of women as a goal. I was raised in the Kashmir Valley in the 1970s and the 1980s at a point when the people of Jammu and Kashmir had a sense of selfhood. They had a sense of nationhood. Their sense of self, their
mhm,
identities, after decades of repression, after decades of having been sunk in the morass of illiteracy and poverty, their identities have been repaired. So
mhm,
that's the era in which I was raised.
mhm,
And I was raised in a Muslim home
mhm,
and educated in a Catholic school.
mhm,
And at the time, Deyasini, we had Irish nuns at our Catholic school. So I had these multiple cultural, religious, linguistic influences that impacted my identity. And I was taught, contrary to what is being taught today, I was
mhm,
taught that religion is a liberatory force, that religion is emancipatory, that religion gives women the right to exercise their agency, political, sociocultural, economic agency, that religion gives women a voice, and recognizes them as entities with rights as well as responsibilities. And honestly, before I moved to the United States, I never thought of myself as South Asian. You know, that was an identity that I did not, or a category that I did not identify with. But after moving to the United States in 1998, uh, whichever university, college I studied, worked, taught at, I was identified as South Asian. So I learned to see myself, or I learned to see my identity as greater than just ethnic, or as greater than just religious or linguistic. And living in the diaspora, I come in contact with people from every part of South Asia. So I have a lot of Indian friends, colleagues, students, Pakistani and Bangladeshi friends, colleagues, and students. And I recognize the heterogeneity of South Asia. I recognize the pluralism that people of my generation were taught to celebrate in the 1970s and the 1980s. And also, living in the diaspora, I learned to question, to interrogate essentialized notions of womanhood, or essentialized notions of what it means to be female, of what it means to be feminine. You see, all these are social and cultural constructs, right? Femininity is not a universal concept. On the contrary, it is a socio-cultural concept. And identity is just as fluid and just as contextual as well. So there are some situations or some contexts in which my identity as a member of the Indian diaspora supersedes every other aspect of my identity. There are other contexts in which my identity as a Kashmiri Muslim woman supersedes every other aspect of my identity. You see? So identity is, and there are other identities in which I'm identified as a transnational woman. So able to cross borders and boundaries with ease and facility. Now, I will tell you that that ability to blur boundaries or to cross boundaries with ease and facility doesn't come easily. Because as you, I think as you kind of alluded to in your question, we are all conditioned or socialized to think of ourselves a certain way, to behave a certain way, to conform to sociocultural norms. That is how we are conditioned. Now, I will, although in my childhood and adolescence, I was fortunate enough to be exposed to various cultural, religious, and linguistic paradigms, but the society as a whole was patriarchal. The society as a whole was conservative, right? And as is the rest of South Asia, really. And women are conditioned to conform to conservative sociocultural norms. And now, with the resurgence of religious fundamentalisms in South Asia, I think women are being pigeonholed with greater aggression in this day and age. Women are required to conform to regressive sociocultural norms with greater aggression. So, living in the diaspora, I recognized my ability or my agency to define myself, to broaden my identity. And here, I could be open minded. I could work with people of other cultural, political, religious leanings in order to identify our common values, our common interests, and then build common ground. Build common
Okay.
ground to solve issues or problems that we all face. The one bond that that brings us all together,
Mm-hmm.
or
Absolutely.
that strengthens us as a group,
Yeah.
is humanity. Is
Mm.
humanity really?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And here in the diaspora, I
Mm-hmm.
see people working to revive humanitarian
Mm.
aspects of religions that they are affiliated with. You see, so working with, for instance, working on the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women,
Mm-hmm.
or working with the Interfaith Religious Alliance of Oklahoma, the Women's Interfaith Religious Alliance of Oklahoma City, I have learned to see how we can all come together, how we are all plagued by the same problems, and we can all come together to resolve those issues. Religious fundamentalisms or cultural fundamentalisms really undermine everyone's identity. Religious fundamentalisms portray the world in terms of black and white. And that is an inaccurate and fallacious portrayal. Because as we all know, the world is a lot more complex. A year ago, Dayashini, the entire world was hit by the corona pandemic,
Yeah.
right? All of us were plagued by that pandemic. And that was when we realized that we
Mm-hmm.
all needed to come together as
Mm-hmm.
one. We all needed to work as one group
Mm-hmm.
in order to survive, in order to live, in order to make the world habitable again. You know, so really,
Yeah.
living in the diaspora has been very liberating for me.
Okay.
Questioning
That
essentialism,
was very
Okay.
questioning
insightful, ma'am.
centralized
Uh,
identities.
Okay. So
that was
next,
really insightful. Yeah, I would
I'll
now
take you up
request
on the yeah.
Sir to continue with his questions.
I'll take you up on that South Asian identity, and I would ask you what would be your views on the evolving concept of the working South Asian women in America, or to be more specific, is it a multi-layered identity that you, as a South Asian, as a woman, as a follower of Islam, and as a professional teacher, experience in America?
Again, that's a very good question, Sarah. Absolutely, identity is multi layered. And I learned to recognize living in the diaspora how my identity is mediated not just through my own history, but through my culture, through my class, through my level of education. and also through the school of religious thought that I most identify with. You see, Saurav, an issue that we have been facing not just in South Asia, but in the United States as well, is that world religions like Islam, Hinduism, Christianity are being portrayed as homogeneous categories. And that, as you well know, is inaccurate. All these religions are heterogeneous. All these religions are multi layered. And all these religions accommodate multiple schools of thought. So, when I started teaching in the United States in the late 90s and early 2000s, one of the classes that I taught was Women in the Muslim World. And quite a few of my students at that point thought that all Arabs were Muslim and all Muslims were Arabs, right? And I had to
Okay.
tell them how my identity as a South Asian Muslim woman was quite different from the identity of an Arab Muslim woman. Because a very strong layer of who I am is cultural. And that culture is pluralistic. That culture is diverse. That culture is a mosaic that
Yeah.
comprises multiple paradigms, multiple schools of
Absolutely.
thought.
Yeah.
So the identity of the evolving South Asian woman in the United States is complex. It's multi-layered. It really is a mosaic. It is a mosaic that comprises historical, cultural, religious, linguistic layers. And what amazes me, interests me as well, is the ability of the professional South Asian women I come in contact with to again interrogate essentialized notions of womanhood, to interrogate what it means to be, within quotes, an Indian woman, a
Mm.
Pakistani woman, a
Right.
Bangladeshi woman, right?
Right.
Those are
Right.
homogeneous categories that are created
Mm.
for political convenience. And those categories serve the interests of the powers that be. So,
Right.
what exactly is an Indian woman? What exactly is a Pakistani woman? Right? So, I see
Yeah.
South Asian women who, professionalized South Asian women who live and work in the United States, deconstructing, deconstructing any attempt to uh, portray their identities in a simplistic fashion and to
That
recognize
was
the complexities that comprise who they are.
that was very well explained indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to take you up on that homogeneous and liberal things that you said. So sadly, recently, violence against the Asians, the blacks, and the Hispanic people in America is reported very frequently. Would you agree that America can still be called a melting pot? And what about the American dream? Is it only accessible if you are white? What I mean is that do you think that there is a kind of a glass ceiling for the people with the hyphenated non-European identities, like say the Asian Americans, the African Americans, and so on. Of course, there may be exceptions like Barack Obama, but generally speaking, is what I saying true?
Well, again, very good question. So,
Thank you.
um, white privilege is a reality. Male privilege is a reality. Uh, America, one of the metaphors used for America is the melting pot, as you pointed out. The other metaphor used for America is the salad bowl. And although America comprises people of several racial groups, ethnic, linguistic, religious groups, it cannot be denied that there is one dominant or hegemonic racial as well as religious group, really. And in the past several years, what we witnessed the world over, in America, South Asia, other parts of the world as well, has been increasing polarization. You see? So the world has been
Yes.
in a state of flux. And globalization has not had a trickle down effect in every part of the world. Globalization has not had a trickle down effect in every part of the United States. The United States is not just New York and Los Angeles. There are several parts of the United States, several groups in this country that are still that still live in the swamp of poverty, that still live in the swamp of semi-literacy, and they do not have access to the American dream. So it's not just minority racial or ethnic groups like African Americans, Hispanic, Asians, but even poor white people
Hmm.
do not have access, do not have the same access to the American dream as wealthy white people, right? So they are marginalized as well. And during the COVID era in particular, unemployment rates have been quite high. Disillusionment has been terrible. Demoralization has been terrible. Isolation, lack of economic avenues of employment, all that has led to mental health issues, right?
Right.
Again, because of which we saw the exacerbation of polarization. And also, I would add to this the resurgence of religious fundamentalisms has a lot to do with the even greater marginalization of, for instance, Asian Muslims in America. You see,
Okay.
Islamophobia is a reality.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
is a reality. It's a reality in parts of South Asia as well. So, police brutality against racial minorities, particularly African Americans, is a reality in the United States. So, I think compared to other countries, what we are seeing in other parts of the world in this day and age, I think America is still the land of opportunity. America still enables accommodation of multiple racial, ethnic, religious identities. America still enables the navigation of difficult terrain. America does give people of other racial, cultural identities spaces in which to grow, in which to come into their own, but it is a struggle. It is a struggle.
Yes.
Because white privilege is a reality, so there indeed is a glass ceiling. As a South Asian woman, I have always felt that I have to work twice as hard to prove myself, you
Yes.
know?
Correct.
And sort of now with a new government in place, there is a paradigm
Yes.
shift. And young people, millennials, are questioning religious fundamentalisms. But there was a time when Islamophobia in the United States was so rampant and so pervasive that I felt that I had to tread very carefully as a Muslim woman.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
that aspect of my identity, the religious aspect of my identity, has always been very important to me. And as I said to Deyasini, for me, religion has been an emancipatory discourse. And it's been important for me to retain that aspect of my identity, right? Um,
Right.
but again, I had to make sure that I wasn't demonized because of my religious identity, because there was a time when it was very easy to criminalize Muslims, when it was
Mhm.
very easy to demonize Muslims. And we see that happening in some parts of India as well today, right? So yes, these are the terrain is not smooth for immigrants. The terrain is not easy, and navigating it can be a challenge, but it can be just as exciting because on the way we make alliances. On the way, on
Okay.
this journey, we forge friendships, we forge relationships with those we have something in common with. And what has helped me along this journey is the ability to empathize with others, the ability to understand where they are coming from. So, a student who has never traveled outside the United States, never traveled outside the Midwest, has never been to a Muslim country, knows very little about the religion, and that students' only exposure to Islam and Muslims has been through mainstream American media, is
Okay.
bound to have a myopic notion
Yeah.
of Muslim culture, Islam, etc. So it has been important for me to cultivate the sensitivity to recognize where such people are coming from, to remain open minded to differences of opinion, and to respectfully interrogate stereotypes, and to enable my students to question their own stereotypical notions. I think that requires
Yeah. Yeah.
empathy, that really requires a lot of open mindedness. And it's not an
Okay.
easy
So
thing to cultivate.
we have to move on. So even if you didn't say so in so many words, I can read between the lines. Time is ripe for self-introspection and whiteness studies for the white people in America. So moving on to my next question.
Yeah.
Uh, Please allow me the audacity of saying that Descartes had said, quote, I think, therefore I am. But now it seems to have changed into I am seen on mainstream and social media, therefore I am. But following this recent phenomenon of being audio visually validated, do you think that there is a conscious attempt in America to be socially and politically correct in selecting people to high posts? Or is it really truly based on talent and merit, as you were referring to in your last answer? I'm saying this because prominent news channels around the world, American ones included, always highlight and glorify such representations in the government offices and the corporate offices. And the second part of my question is, do we in India make more of the people of Indian origin than they ever think connected to India themselves? I am, of course, keeping in mind Kamala Harris here. So, would you please comment on this?
So, yeah, repeat the second part of your question, Sarah. Do we
I
make
was
more?
saying that do we people in India make more of the people of Indian origin than those people ever think they are connected to India? And of course, I'm keeping Kamala Harris in mind when I say this. I mean, people
Okay,
like
that's
Kamala Harris.
okay. Good, good. I would like to respond to the second part of your question first, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Again, Saurav, the category Indian diaspora is not homogeneous. It is just as diverse as the Indian nation, right? And it's important to recognize that. Some members of the Indian diaspora were raised in India, like me, right? I spent my formative years in Kashmir and New Delhi. So my emotional connection with my land of origin is much greater than that of my child
Hmm.
who has not been raised in India or in Kashmir, right? I speak my native language, unlike my child. I respect my cultural traditions, rituals, and try to maintain them here as well. I straddle two cultural identities, unlike my child. For
True.
her, America is her home, Oklahoma is her home, and India or Kashmir, New Delhi, Kashmir, those are places where she goes on vacation, right? Now, someone like Kamala Harris, who is half Indian and wasn't raised in India, a significant part of Kamala Harris's identity is Jamaican.
Hmm.
And really, during her political campaign, while she was on the campaign trail, and before she was sworn in as well, that part of her identity, the Jamaican part, was highlighted a lot more than the Indian part, right? And
Yeah.
although she was raised by her mother, who was a single parent, and Kamala
Correct.
Harris spent time in India with her relatives, but she never lived there. She wasn't raised in India. So her relationship with the subcontinent would be quite different from that of someone who spent her formative years in that country, right? So again, it's important to recognize that the Indian diaspora is heterogeneous. And also, some members of the Indian diaspora are a lot more invested in their country of origin. That investment is constructive for some, not as constructive for others. As I pointed out in my response to Deyasini's question, every transnational subject does not have a constructive approach when it comes to her or his country of origin. So there are several transnational subjects who have supported financially, emotionally, and intellectually fundamentalist movements in their countries of origin, right? And we have
Okay.
evidence to substantiate that claim that I just made. So the resurgence of religious fundamentalisms in India, for instance, or Pakistan or Bangladesh, has been supported financially as well as emotionally by transnational subjects in the US and the UK. And at this point, I'm thinking of the demolition of the Babri Masjid in particular. And I'm thinking of the saffron wave in India as well, which was supported by some transnational subjects, right? So, but then there are people in the Indian diaspora who were able to maintain a critical distance from their country of origin, from their culture of origin, and say, we do not support that regressive practice. We do not support that regressive political ideology. You know,
Yeah.
so that
And
is
the
one
first,
response. Yeah.
yeah, the first part of my question
Which could you
is
repeat that?
promoting
Sorry,
people.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just asked, is there a kind of a representation in selecting people to high posts, or is it actually truly based on merit and talent?
Well, so your question is about whether tokenism exists or not.
Yes.
So I would say that tokenism exists in several organizations as well as several institutions, right? So there are several legislatures, for instance, across the United States and in various parts of the world, to which women get elected, and sometimes those women are treated as mere tokens. You know, they are in the
Hmm.
minority, so not really able to bring about policy reform, legislative reform. All they do is toe the line, but you have the token black woman, or the
Yeah.
token Asian woman, or the token Muslim woman. So I think that tokenism exists in several institutions, but at the end of the day, and I'm talking about my own experience, tokenism might open a few doors for members of, for instance, minority racial groups or gender linguistic groups, might open a few
Okay.
doors. But at the end of the day, you've got to prove yourself as a
Right.
contributing member. At the end of the day, and I'm talking about my own experience, there is a sense of accountability. There is a
Right.
transparency that comes into play. And again, I see this as an immigrant. You see, because I am an immigrant, because I am a member of the South Asian diaspora, I feel like I am held to account. I am held to account. So, um, I might be the first Kashmiri woman on the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women. I might be the first Kashmiri woman uh, elected a state commissioner, which is great. So there might be some tokenism there, but then I work extremely hard to prove myself on that commission. Any
No doubt
project,
about that. No doubt about that.
any project that I organize on, for instance, recently I organized a project on the epidemic of human trafficking in Oklahoma
Mhm.
and legislative changes that we require to rehabilitate victims and survivors of human trafficking. I worked my tail off to make that project successful, and I put the pressure on myself because I belong to a different racial, ethnic group. So I put that pressure on myself. I felt the need to prove myself, you know?
Kudos
So
to
I
you.
think,
Hats off to you, really.
thank you. So I think those of us who are in the minority, whether it's as women, as South Asians, whatever, when we're in the minority, we get noticed a lot more. It is much easier to stereotype us because there are so few of us. And there is also the pressure on us to toe the line. So, exercising our agency, proving ourselves, recognizing our own uniqueness, and then going on to prove ourselves, and making it to a position where we are empowered enough to bring about policy change, legislative reform, that takes a lot of work, but it is
Right.
extremely gratifying. It is very gratifying.
Okay. Thank you for this answer. And Deyasini, please take over.
Yes, yes, yes. So, ma'am, you were talking about the heterogeneity of the Indian diaspora. So, I would like to ask you that how would you define the term identity with regard to your own struggles that you mentioned in one of your interviews, not only with the complicated notions of political identity, regionalism, nationalism, but also with the effects of discourses of cultural and religious nationalism.
Again, you and Saurav are asking great questions.
Thank you.
So, Dayashini, conforming to whatever the dominant discourse is at the time, right? Religious, cultural, nationalist, conforming to it makes life easy. Allowing yourself to be placed in a pigeonhole might make life easy, but it makes life meaningless. And the Kashmir, as I pointed out a little while ago, the Kashmir that I was raised in, the India that I was raised in, was secular. It celebrated diversity. It celebrated its ability to accommodate multiple points of view. It celebrated its ability to negotiate with opposing forces and build common ground. But then what we saw in Kashmir in the late 80s, early 90s, and what we saw in mainland India as well, again in the 90s and then 2000s with the resurgence of the saffron wave, was attempts to stifle voices of voices that celebrated diversity, was attempts to stifle difference and really demonize difference. We saw a compulsion in Kashmir as well as in mainland India to conform to hegemonic notions of cultural identity, religious identity, right? And that can be terrible because that destroys the soul, that destroys the spirit, that leads to political oppression, that leads to cultural myopia, and that leads to reductive notions of identity. When I mentioned in my response to Saurav's question that the Indian diaspora is heterogeneous, one of the categories that we need to highlight is that class, socioeconomic class. So not every member of the Indian diaspora had access to quality education in the country of origin. Not every member of the Indian diaspora was privileged in the country of origin. Not every member of the Indian diaspora had access to the echelons of power in the country of origin, right? So we see such people in the United States as well who come from marginalized socioeconomic groups. Who come, you see, caste, for instance, caste is still a reality in India, Dayashini, right? And I come across several members of marginalized castes in the United States who are finding their voice here and who are able to articulate their reality here and work to revive their subaltern cultures, their subaltern literatures. So that is happening as well. You know, sort of in response to your question about white privilege and the lack of privilege of racial minorities, the other side of the coin is that those racial minorities, economically marginalized people, or Dalits, for instance, from India, have been able to find a voice in the United States. They have been able to revive their subaltern political cultural identities here. That's the other side of the coin, right? Something that they were not
Right.
able to do in their countries of origin.
Right.
In the Pakistani diaspora, for instance, Saurav, Ahmadis in Pakistan are ostracized, constitutionally not recognized as Muslim, right? But in the United States, the other side of the coin is that in the United States, Ahmadis are able to practice their faith.
I think we've lost her. She's
Religious
having some network
leadership.
issues. Yeah, please continue.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. You can
Yes, yes,
continue. We
yes,
can hear you. We can see you.
So they have been able to revive their religious literatures. That is the other side of the coin, right? So, Deyasini, I just lost my train of thought. Could you repeat your question?
Yes,
Deyasini, can you
ma'am.
hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you. So, ma'am, I asked you, how would you define the term identity with regard to your own struggles? Can you hear me? Can
Yeah,
you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you now. I can hear you now.
Yeah. I was
Yeah,
asking you
absolutely.
how you would define the term identity with regard to your own struggles that you had mentioned in one of your interviews, not only with the complicated notions of political identity, regionalism, nationalism, but also with the effects of the discourses of cultural and religious nationalism.
Yeah. That's okay. So again, as I said a little while ago, identity is fluid. Identity is context. When we talk about hegemonic discourses or dominant discourses, hegemonic discourses are also shifting. So at one point in time, during my childhood and adolescence, the dominant discourse in Kashmir, or the hegemonic discourse, was completely different from what it is now, or from what it was in the 90s. So in the 90s, in that turmoil, the literal that we saw, several people were holding on to their religious identities with tenacity. Fear mongering. You guys hear me? Sourav Deyasini?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Deyasini,
Uh,
Sourav?
We can hear
Ma'am,
you.
yeah, we can hear
So
you.
even today, South Asia, in the United States, several people hold on to their religious identities with tenacity. The fear of the other.
We have lost her
I think
again.
there's a glitch.
Can
Yeah,
you hear
there's
me
a glitch.
now?
We wait.
Yeah.
You're back. Please
Can you
continue.
guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
So
you.
the fear of the other is propagated by political forces, right? And that rhetoric, political rhetoric that propagates the fear of the other has incited acts of violence in various parts of the world. So that fear mongering, we're seeing that in mainland India, we're seeing it in Kashmir, we're seeing it in the United States. And that has led to violence against some religion, against some racial groups. That has led to demonization of some religious groups. So while I was growing up, Deyasini,
Right.
there was a lot of emphasis in Kashmir on a newly created democratic identity, on an identity that recognized the emancipation of the tiller, on an identity that recognized the essence of nationhood, the importance of quality.
There seems to be some issue with her net connection. We've lost her, so we wait.
Can
She'll
you
come back.
guys
Yeah,
hear
she
me
is.
now?
She is back.
Yeah, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So there
we
was a
can hear you.
lot of emphasis on recognizing the youth as stakeholders in their own future, in the political process.
Mhm.
But then what we saw in the 90s was very different. So the hegemonic discourse of the 90s underlined religious fundamentalism, underlined political oppression, underlined militarization, militancy and militarization, you know? And in India, the hegemonic discourse was religious and cultural fundamentalism as well, right? India, the diversity of India was being eroded by the powers that be in the late 90s and the 2000s.
Right.
So in order to think beyond borders, in order to think, and really the only way problems can be resolved, political problems, economic problems, is when we learn to think beyond borders and beyond boundaries, right? When we learn to negotiate with one another and bring everyone to the table as a stakeholder. That is the only time we can resolve problems. And I'll tell you, as a Muslim woman, what I saw in the 90s in Kashmir, as well as in mainland India, was the pressure by forces of militancy as well as militarization to lead a life of conformity. I saw a reductive portrayal of the Muslim as someone more society. I had a reductive portrayal. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear
Can you
you,
hear
but your
me?
voice is cracking up a bit.
Yeah, that is what.
Yeah, we can hear you, but your voice is cracking up.
Yeah.
I think we lost her again, and a wonderful conversation. Uh, I don't know, it has abruptly ended or not. We wait for a few seconds. Let's see if she is able to rejoin. In fact, she was giving brilliant insights, and we have a lot of information about things that we wanted to know. So we wait. She will be trying to come back. Yeah,
Yeah,
she
she
is.
is back. She
Uh,
is back.
okay. Since we are, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I
Hello.
can hear you. A point
Yeah.
I
So
would like to
since
make.
we have already,
Saurav, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. I
Just
can hear you,
one point that
but
I
your
would
voice is
like to
cracking up a
make.
bit.
Yeah. Can you? Am I clearer now? Am I clearer?
Yeah. Please go on. Please go on. Yes.
Sort of a point I would like to make real quick is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so a point that I would make real quick is that in the 90s and the 2000s, I saw the reduction of the native woman in mainland India and Kashmir as well to the repository of tradition and culture. So the native woman was seen as the one who passed on religious traditions to the younger generation. Her unique identity as an individual was not recognized. Her unique political, socio-cultural aspirations, educational aspirations were not recognized. Right?
Right.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you, ma'am.
So, in the political conflict we saw in Kashmir and in mainland India as well, any attempt to emasculate a community, any attempt to emasculate a political movement
We lost her again. So
symbolize.
we can see you now.
Can
Can
you
you hear
hear
me?
me?
Yeah, I can.
I can hear you. I can hear
Yeah, I
you.
can hear you now. I can hear you
I
now.
can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
me?
We
Okay,
can hear you.
great. So
Yeah, yeah.
the point that I was trying to make was that any attempt to violate the native woman was seen as symbolic of eroding a culture, was seen as symbolic of undermining a political movement. And we have been seeing that in mainland India as well. Right?
Right.
The recent religious polarization that we witnessed in mainland India, during that polarization, Muslim women as well as Hindu women were portrayed as repositories of religion, cultural tradition. They were not recognized as unique individuals with their unique aspirations, unique educational aspirations. You guys hear me?
We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, ma'am. We cannot hear you. There seems to be some kind of signal problem with you. Are you able to hear us? Would you please try to reconnect? Maybe leave and reconnect. Yeah, she's trying to. She's left and she's trying to reconnect. So we wait for a few more minutes. Yeah, she's back. So hope everything works fine this time.
We've had
Uh,
so much trouble with StreamYard. Yeah. So the point that I was trying to make is that cultural fanaticism as well as religion. Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yes,
Can you
ma'am,
hear
we can hear
me?
you. We can hear you.
Cultural fanaticism as well as religious fanaticism, they pigeonhole women, right? They see them only as repositories of cultural traditions and rituals. They do not see them as agents of change, agents of transformation. They do not see them as people with political agency, right?
Right.
Which is why when we think about any kind of conflict, when we think about religious turmoil in mainland India, religious polarization, when we think about militancy and militarization in Kashmir, we will find plenty of examples of women who were portrayed reductively. They were portrayed reductively, and the violation of those women was seen as symbolic of the emasculation of the religious community that they belonged to, or of the political movement that they might have been affiliated with. So cultural nationalisms and religious nationalisms can undermine the identities of women. And it is a challenge to question those attempts to undermine women's identities. And we as women do that by recognizing our political agency, by recognizing the impact we can make in the public realm, by recognizing the roles that we can play in policy reform, you see, in legislative reform, in institutional reform. All right, does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So since we are running short of time, actually we've overshot. We planned 40-45 minutes, and you have spoken so brilliantly that we are over an hour now. So just a quick question and a very short answer from you. What I'd like to ask you is, do you think that the term diaspora is passé, and transnationals would be the more correct term to refer to people who migrated because they had the means and desire to do so, rather than being forced to leave, and the fact that they can travel seamlessly to and fro? So a very short answer from you, please.
Oh my goodness, you ask me such complicated questions and then expect short answers. Well,
Okay, ma'am, take your time. Take your time.
Again, not every transnational subject has the privilege to travel back and forth. There are several transnational subjects in the United States, members of various diasporas who are here illegally.
We have lost her again.
Yeah, we lost you again.
The
Yeah,
skills.
yeah, she's come back.
Can you
Let's
hear
see.
me?
Let's see.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
yeah.
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you, ma'am.
yeah.
We can hear you.
So several transnational subjects did not have the financial means, the skills, the education to come to America as legal immigrants. And they have to find other means. So there are people here from several South American nations who are in the United States as illegal immigrants. They have their manual skills to offer, and those manual skills do not bring them much, just minimum wage, and menial jobs as well in this country. So not everyone has the privilege to go back and forth.
Again, we lost her. Okay, we'll wait. She'll come back.
Yeah,
You hear me?
she's back.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
she's back. Yes.
We can.
Not everyone has the privilege to play a role in policy reform, in legislative reform. I come across several students from Mexico, several students from Spanish-speaking countries who come from very challenging socioeconomic backgrounds. And those students have a hand-to-mouth living, or those people have a hand-to-mouth living in the United States. And they cannot dream of going to their countries of origin every year because for them, it is simply not affordable.
Okay. Right.
And then Saurabh, also, we still have the category of the political refugee. We still have the category of the political asylee. So there are several immigrants.
Oh no.
Republics, the Balkan republics, who are here as political refugees, or from the former Soviet Union. They have sought political asylum in this country. Right?
Right, yes.
So again, it's a very
Absolutely.
heterogeneous group. Yeah. With varied political compulsions.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, of course, it did.
So Saurabh,
and yeah.
You were supposed to rein me in. You didn't do that very well.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We don't want to cut short on knowledge. We don't, and but then we would have lost out on the knowledge that you had to share. It doesn't really matter. And since you are saying that we are asking complicated questions, let's move on to something simple. And Deyasini, I'll request Deyasini to read something from her creation, which perhaps will not be so complicated, and maybe she'll ask you something from there. Deyasini, please.
Yes. So, ma'am, this is a poem that I wrote last year, and the poem is inspired by Santosh Bakaya ma'am's award-winning short story, When the World Lost Its Marbles. So, here I go. The piercing cusps of Vasvan wafted across the borders of my senses in time. Senses glissading into the love of garlicky cenote. A cenote so deep as the endless waters of Ammi's soul, reverberating her words. You don't get the smell of garlic because I prepare it with immense love, especially for you. A cenote now open to the blue, blue sky, where the orangey clouds of basil and aspens crystallize into tiny blobs. She is gone. Oh, we lost her.
She'll come back. She'll come back.
I'm
Don't
back.
worry.
I'm here.
Yeah.
She'll come back. Okay, she's here. Continue, Darshini.
Yeah. A cenote now open to the blue, blue sky, where the orangey clouds of basil and aspens crystallize into tiny blobs of a red, red rose, stretching out its little hands to brace the towering pine. Afloat at the edges of my Venitas mind, dissolving the borders of hatred in the blue waters of Epiphany. So, ma'am, envisioning a community that is as deep as the fluid of Epiphany, where borders blur and fishes join to pave the way for the education of the younger generation, for the restoration of humanity. You have come a long way. So, if you could tell us more about this enlightening voyage.
Well, I've told you so much already, but yes, it's been a fantastic journey, a journey that I'm very grateful for, and I learn something new every day. I feel like I'm given opportunities to grow and evolve every single day. And living and working in the diaspora, I have recognized that community is the courage to
Mhm.
build bridges, that community is the courage to respect dissent and differences of opinion, and that community is the courage to listen with open mindedness and empathy to every stakeholder, and to recognize that while we may not agree with one another, we can always build common ground. That common ground would enable our younger generations to grow and to flourish, really. And, I think of Abraham Lincoln, who in 1857, I believe, I think, or was it, I may have gotten that date wrong, but Abraham Lincoln, who said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. So it is time to garner the courage to come together as one. It is time to garner the courage to forge dialogue, to build, to cultivate diplomacy, to listen to one another and accommodate everyone's point of view. That is the kind of mosaic that I would like to create. A world in which no religious identity, no racial or ethnic identity is demonized.
Right. I think we lost her
And
again.
and Dayashini
Oh no.
and Dayashini and
Yes, ma'am.
Saurabh,
Yes, ma'am.
the
Yeah.
note that I would like the note that I would like to end on is that living and working in the Midwest, which, as you know, is called the Bible Belt. The Midwest,
Hmm.
Oklahoma, is part of the Bible Belt.
Mhm.
So, and teaching at various educational institutions here, I recognized that America was not just Hollywood, that America was not just New York and Los Angeles. Most parts of America are rural. The economy in rural America is still agrarian. Rural America, agrarian America, has not seen the trickle down effects of globalization. The kind of fear mongering that we see in South Asia, we see that in rural America as well. There is a fear
Right.
that they are losing their racial uniqueness, their religious uniqueness, the fear that we see in South Asia also, the cultural nationalisms and religious nationalisms that we see there as well, you know? And this fear will dissipate. This fear will dissipate only when we bridge that gulf between the us and them. Only when we learn to question that dichotomy of the us and them, the West and the East, right?
Mhm.
And black. And that dichotomy became deeply entrenched post 9/11, right? The fear of the
Right,
other,
right.
whether we are in mainland India, Kashmir, the United States, it must be proactively questioned. And we can do that as scholars, activists, academics, right? And our
Right, right.
training in literature enables us to recognize
We lost her again, it seems. Uh, she comes back, Dashini. We need to wind this up.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
So let us wait for.
Let us
Yeah,
wait
she
for a
is.
few seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she is back.
Yeah, she's
So,
back.
so we really need to wind up now. So, can you hear us?
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I can, yes.
Uh, so thank you so much, ma'am. It was such a brilliant session. Like, thank you once again for your time and for sharing with us these extremely knowledgeable insights. With this, we end the conversation.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Dashini and Saurav. Excellent questions. Excellent questions.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Thank,
Be
Oh,
well, and
thanks.
I enjoyed
Thanks.
talking with you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.